Welcome to the Down But Not Out podcast. I'm John, and today we sit down with Vic to talk all things schools, transitions and safety. So let's get into it.
Here we go. So welcome to MKFM for the Down But Not Out podcast, here with Arthur Ellis, the online mental health charity, and the wonderful, handsome and freshly shaved, and he's with his new
Against
haircut.
my will.
Did I hold you down?
The hairdressers just did it because they didn't charge me or anything. Hair Masters, Stony Stratford.
There you go. You're not, this isn't a sponsorship.
No,
You can't
it's not,
sing it. The wonderful Mr. John Manning. And here on the Down But Not Out podcast, we've been lucky enough to have some fabulous guests. And another fabulous guest today. We've got Vic. Hello. Oh, no, Victoria, but definitely not Vicky.
Yeah,
that's right. We're getting it right. Absolutely. Now, Victoria, just tell us your job role so we understand where you come from.
Yeah, so I work for a multi-academy trust called Inspiring Futures Through Learning, which is predominantly Milton Keynes-based schools with a couple in Corby. And I am Head of Safeguarding Health, Children and Families. So nice big long title there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, essentially my role is to support all the schools and oversee safeguarding in 21 schools.
I was going to say there's over 20, aren't there? So how on earth do you do that?
And by the way, I've only got half an hour, so keep
sorry, that was off the cuff, but it just seems like such a big job because we run our one-to-one service and there's loads of safeguarding in that, as you can imagine. Everyone's vulnerable, but how do you sort of split your time across so many schools?
It takes some juggling, but we've got a wonderful team of DSLs in all the schools, so they're the designated safeguarding leads. So every school has a designated safeguarding lead and I work alongside them and then all the school staff. So it makes it a lot more manageable, but they're all highly trained professionals, and so that makes my job a lot easier.
And so how did you get into this? What's your background? We've been hearing off air about your travels around the world, but after that you came back, well, I'll probably get a job. How did you end up in the role that you're in?
So I grew up locally, so I'm from Bean Hill.
Bean Hill, you pronounce the H. You know what I mean? There's people in Bean Hill go, do you mean Bean Hill? Yeah, Bean Hill one, yes.
And I went to some of the local schools, so what was Moorlands, and then what was Copperfield, which is now New Chapter, and then again Sir Frank Markham. And I grew up around foster children, so my parents had foster children in and out the house, and I think just a collective kind of experience of being around a lot of kind of safeguarding issues as I grew up, having a lot of experiences. I then kind of veered into the world of SEND. So I went to uni and did mental health, psychology and inclusive education with the overall aim of probably coming out to be a SENCO or work in that domain. But I then did a master's in speech and language therapy and realised actually I prefer what's going on at home as opposed to what we're doing at school. And alongside all of that, I did loads of voluntary work. I worked for lots of charities, and then just kind of started in the safeguarding world. So started working in local authorities and very, very quickly worked my way up. So I've worked in a lot of jobs in local authorities where I've managed around, in some, 141 schools.
Wow.
So 21 is all right.
Oh God, look at this! It's a breeze. Wow. It's a breeze.
Yeah, so
so how long have you been doing sort of professionally in your job? Have you noticed that the point I'm trying to get to is during that time, have you seen a lot of change with the emphasis upon safeguarding? Or
yes,
has it always been?
yeah, definitely. So I think in the beginning, safeguarding was seen a little bit in silo. It was kind of one of those things where if you were known to services or accessing support in the safeguarding arena, it was very much kind of hush-hush and you were doing that in the background. Now it's not. Safeguarding is at the forefront of everything. We talk openly about safeguarding, not about individual cases, but in terms of culturally, how we seek to keep people safe and children safe and adults safe. But also now there's this big steer around mental health and actually how that dips in and out of the safeguarding arena. So obviously we've got early help as well, which is kind of just sits below where we see some of our more, our cases that would tend to hit kind of crisis point or where families really need to seek some support externally. And what goes alongside that is our well-being and mental health kind of streamlined. So we tend to see that safeguarding is more commonplace, and we're seeing that nationally as well. There's, football clubs, for instance, now all have safeguarding officers. It's something that's really taken off. There's recognition now that we all have a responsibility to keep everybody safe.
And it's really interesting that you say about it being not really heard of. My wife, actually, she teaches dance and stuff like that, and she was the safeguarding officer for this school that she's teaching at, and it was very much like, oh yeah, you sort of do that, and she got some training but not a lot, and it was very much oh yeah, you do that as part of, whereas now it feels like we're paying attention to it because we're realising how important this stuff and the effects it has therefore on the individual in later life. You know what I mean? So I think it's really interesting to know that it's being taken far more seriously, which is
massively.
Yeah. And we used to always joke about the DSL kind of being shut in a cupboard in the in the school and crack on with it, but it's just not the case now, and I think the guidance has made everything clear around it's everybody's responsibility, and that's really pushed the onus on everyone. And what follows from that is a lot of training and CPD and awareness raising around all the different safeguarding issues that are at play.
Also, other people understanding what confidentiality is, because in our service we've got to explain what the parameters are, and obviously people think that sometimes if you're having a one-to-one conversation it's confidential, but with safeguarding there's certain areas that you can break that. Break might not be the right word, that might be a bit harsh.
I think it's more around having an understanding of sometimes it may be a confidential space where you're having a one-to-one conversation, but if you felt that the person was at risk of harm or likely to harm others, then at that point you'd have to say, we have to share this information because we need to keep people safe. And I think sometimes that can be quite tricky because people perceive confidentiality as between me and you. But when we are talking about safety, there are rules that are in place, and we have to keep people safe.
Yeah, you've got to be taken so seriously. The
explanation, that because you're ultimately trying to gain trust with the individual that's going through something. You gain that trust, and then you're not that you're undermining it on purpose, but for a bigger reason. But making them be able to see that's got to be a tricky situation.
It is, and I think one of the things that I say to staff, because it is a question that comes up, it comes up with families, it comes up with children, it comes up with staff, is ultimately, if somebody can see that you're acting in their best interest, that relationship will rebuild. It absolutely will, because you're there to keep someone safe. I think in the moment when someone thinks they're telling you something that's not going to go any further, and then, if you then don't disclose to them that you're going to pass that information, absolutely, that breaks trust. We have to tell people if we're going to pass that information on.
Take them along with you.
That's it. Explain to them why that information has to be shared, so that they have a kind of collective understanding of why that information is being passed on. And then usually there's that loop back of then support being offered. And that relationship then, once they see, actually, I've actually gained something from sharing that information. Either I don't have the kind of psychological burden of holding that, or someone's physically supporting me. That builds relationships typically.
Like you say, once you see the results, that's going to be the way.
It's not. I think sometimes we deal with safeguarding all the time, and it can be quite relationship damaging if you do need to raise an issue with someone's parents or whatever it might be, or their guardians. And we have seen relationships break down as a result, but then years later they've come back and they've said that was absolutely the right decision at the time. So managing that in school settings and stuff, obviously our service, people can leave and come back. You can't really do that with school.
No.
So that
you should.
So that must be a real challenge to manage those relationships ongoing.
Yeah, and I think that's where training comes in and support, and luckily our safeguarding leads will call. There's myself and my deputy Vicky, who's wonderful, and she worked in the police, so we've got a real shared experience, and we manage that with schools. So if they're kind of a bit nervy about the conversations that maybe they're having to have, they will call us and say, "Oh, can we just talk this through?" Yeah, absolutely, and manage it in this way. But actually, it's very seldom that there's a real relationship breakdown. Quite often it's about the way in which you're having the conversations, and if you're not focusing on restorative kind of practice, they're not comfortable conversations to have. But actually, for most children in schools, they have trusted adults, so they know that the adults want them to feel safe and happy in school. So that kind of gets to the point where if I'm telling you that I need to share this information, it must be pretty serious. And I think there's that kind of understanding most of the time.
With the individuals, is it a case that the teachers are keeping an eye on the individuals and go, right, we need to have a chat, can I help to have that chat, or do you wait for them to come to you? Is that it can be either or either, how does that sort of work within the...
So one of the things that staff are trained to look for is any change in behaviour. So that could be anything. That could be, physical changes, maybe emotional changes, so children being a bit withdrawn, or sometimes, going the other way and being really loud. So looking at those changes in behaviour, and staff will raise that to the safeguarding leads. What we don't typically do is kind of, we might do wellbeing check-ins with children. Say, how are you feeling today? What's that look like? Lots of schools
quite
use
casual
zones of regulation. So children identify themselves how they're feeling, and if they're feeling, red or blue, that might then lead to a conversation about, why are we feeling like that today? Is there anything? Those conversations aren't designed to elicit some kind of disclosure. It's more around sense checking. Is there anything you need today?
Right. Okay.
So sometimes what happens in those conversations is that children say, I am feeling a bit blue today, and the reasons for that are and actually what you might find is that they need to say something, in which case that's passed on to the safeguarding lead, who will then deal with that information. So that's typically the way it happens. We don't, staff aren't trained to approach children in that manner. Because if there's anything that kind of went to court or legally, it would be deemed as leading questions. So again, it comes back to the skill set that you have. So typically, if we are very concerned and there's been loads of changes in behaviour, but there's not been anything disclosed, that we can't do anything, we can just monitor and support. And there'll be the conversations going on with families in the background around, we've noticed this, is there anything going on at home? Sometimes it could be things like a pet's died, and actually the child's decided I can't speak about that in school, but the parents then can give you a bit of an insight. This is why they're feeling like that. Other times it's more serious, but we wait for children to tell us. We always act on what we're seeing, what we're hearing, so those behavioural changes, and then contextually the information we've got in the background. So there's a lot that goes into
tricky,
it.
It's
very
tricky. It's a very delicate balancing act.
And how often, I know we should be finishing, and you want to round me up, but across all of the schools and that many young people, how common are these? Just for anyone who's listening and maybe this is a big scary thing, like how often are there these conversations or these disclosures happening?
So conversations around wellbeing and mental health are daily, because that's how schools start the day. Talk to me about how you're feeling. Let's start the day recognising how we feel, because actually if we're coming in a red zone, which on the zones of regulation is I'm angry and I'm frustrated, are we then able to access our education? Probably not. So actually we need to immediately do something. In terms of safeguarding, again, there's daily conversations, and you hold certain cases in schools, so you'll have families that are on child protection registers, you have children that are on child in need, some are accessing early help support, and all of that is kind of managed in school, but there'll be conversations daily in school about safeguarding.
It's good. It's so complicated.
Always.
It's so complicated. Thank you very much. Right, Vic, we're going to be coming back to you. Part number 2 of the Down But Not Out podcast here on MKFM, coming next. So welcome back to part number 2 of the Down But Not Out podcast here on MKFM with Vic. Vic, I forgot your title because it was very long. Go on.
So Head of Safeguarding Health, Children and Families.
There you go, just to put it in context of what we're going to be speaking about. I know, John, you've got some questions. Questions, sir, questions.
Loads of questions.
Always.
Yes, but we just talked about safeguarding, but I can imagine being the new school year, how do you carry over safeguarding? Because you're going to have kids that are joining you for the first time. You've got to protect them.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine that's just one big meeting.
No.
How do you?
Everybody, right? We're going to meet
Yeah.
up. It's like, yeah,
There are
that's
1,000
insane.
children to go through.
Yeah, so the DSLs will have already spoken to each other. So they'll already, from the feeder schools into, let's say, primary to secondary, so they will have already made contact to say, these are the children we're expecting to be on roll. And just to kind of let you know, these are the ones that we maybe have a few concerns about.
Okay.
So that happens. We can't transfer any records until the child physically arrives in school.
Really?
Why?
So you're kind of on the back foot already, like.
Yeah, so it's a very, very big job. When the children arrive at school that first day and they are registered in, that's when we receive the records, hopefully, because we've got 5 working days so to receive those records. So that's some real pressure for the safeguarding leads to make sure that the support's in place, that they understand the kind of history of the family, understand where they currently are, so that they can ensure that whatever's been in place continues in their new school.
Yeah.
Why, just logistically, why does it have to be on the first day? Why can't it be previous to that?
Oh, it's all to do with GDPR, privacy, confidentiality. So we can't access anyone's records because they don't belong to the school yet, if you see what I mean.
They're moving, do you know, just in terms of, I'm sorry, I'm
It would
sure
make it a lot easier.
there are reasons that go over my stupid head, but it would seem like the thing to do. You know which school you're going to when you leave a certain school, so just pass it on.
I
Is that
think
not?
sometimes it can blur the lines of accountability.
Okay. I
so
see.
you know, if a child
They're not
hasn't
asked
yet,
you until they are.
that's it. So if they haven't yet started, and that's why it's until they're physically in school. So even the
Right.
day before the inset day, no, we can't have them. They have to physically have arrived to school, because sometimes you get children who do change school place. They maybe decide to be home educated. They might move abroad, and actually we can't have their information. That's not, that's not fair. It's not the way the system works.
So it's really nice that obviously it's imperative people get taken care of through that transition.
Yes.
But not all of it is the level of safeguarding. So a lot of young people will experience difficulty in transition just generally.
Yes.
Like it's just a thing. Not necessarily to that degree, but what kind of issues do young people face? Because you've got young people coming from primary to secondary, or just going from like year 9 to now we've got GCSEs this year.
Yeah.
There's loads of different transitions throughout school.
Some of them they're babies to adults, aren't they?
Yeah,
Like some of those
yeah.
school, they're the big kids with the little, and then all of a sudden they're the little kids again, and that's scary.
So I think that all children will feel some level of anxiety, but moving between schools, moving between school years, even in primary. As parents, sometimes the language we use is, you're going up to the big year now, so actually for children there will always be that underlying level of, this has changed. Change feels strange, and actually the way to describe it to adults around particularly primary to secondary is, imagine if someone took you from your job now and let's say you worked here, in a radio station, and someone picked you up and put you in a factory sorting fish, and they were very specific fish, and you had to sort them into piles, and you had no idea.
Right.
That's the equivalent of change we're talking about.
And you're being marked on it.
Exactly, and you're being marked on
Someone's
it.
there with a clipboard
That's
taking you
it.
away.
Gonna get slapped with a haddock, I tell you. Bang out of my own comfort zone.
And that's it. You're talking about not just an environmental change, you're talking about a social change, you're talking about all those emotional changes, because suddenly people perceive you as being older than you are. It's what we call adultification.
Right,
you go from
yeah.
being this child in primary to being viewed as older than you are in a secondary school. You're at secondary now. You should know how to do that.
Yeah.
And
like 6 weeks earlier, you did not know how to do that because
Exactly.
I love it. Oh my word, scary.
So it's a big change
of responsibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, yeah. And I think so you will have, every child will be going through that internally. It just depends on the type of child as to how much you see of that. But I think it's important as parents and professionals to recognise we aren't just talking about a few children experience anxieties. All children will experience some form of anxieties. It just depends how it presents.
Right, okay.
It may be that and it is normal. Okay, so I think that's an important thing to say, is that you might get a child who is a bit worried about going to secondary school,
Yep.
arrives and within a few weeks is settled.
Yes.
That is kind of what we hope for every child. They kind of have the first few weeks of, this is a big building, am I going to be lost? How do I eat? How do I use the toilet? You know,
It is, yeah.
what am I doing?
Yeah.
But then that kind of subsides as time goes on, and
Right.
they've got their friends and things like that.
And that's a straightforward one. At what point would because I think the moment you put a time frame on it, parents go, "Oh my word, 3 weeks!" But I mean, if you were to offer advice to anyone who's got a kid transitioning to another school, if after a couple of months they're still is that a point where you go, maybe you start asking questions of the child and go, how are you getting on? Is that? I mean, is there a time frame on that sort of stuff?
So again, individual to the child.
Yeah, of course.
We tend to see, so some really key early identifiers are the biggest, the kind of time in which we see EBSNA, which is emotion-based school non-attendance, is the transition between year 6 and 7.
Oh, okay.
So it's really, really important that parents utilise the 6-week holiday to really support their children in terms of setting them up for this transition.
Okay.
So the things that we would kind of be looking at is any type of school avoidance, though, that needs to be picked up and supported straight away.
Okay.
School avoidance doesn't tend to get better until we've got the right people supporting. So it takes two, it takes the school, it takes the parents initially. If that continues, then it might take support from external professionals. But any type of school avoidance or non-attendance needs support. Because particularly with transition.
When you say early, is it like day one, like, oh, I don't want to go to school and stuff? At what point would a parent think like, this is avoidance now, this isn't?
Well, I think again, knowing your child. So if your child's kind of like, I'd rather be at home playing PlayStation.
So and that therefore would be 99% of the yeah, exactly.
Then that's slightly different. This is when you're starting to see anxiety present at the thought of going to school, and that might be some really clear communication from your child, and that doesn't have to be verbal communication. It can be kind of behaviours. It can be being withdrawn and quiet, and a real I'm struggling here to get to school. I'm finding it hard to get out the door. I'm finding it hard to put on the new uniform. Those types of behaviours need to be picked up straight away. You need to communicate with school, because actually that enables school to put that support in straight away.
Right, okay.
What we don't want in schools is for parents to just carry that on their own and become increasingly frustrated at their children, because it's really difficult. So I think that's the first thing to parents is, please don't do it on your own, because it's really hard. It's a really hard thing to manage, because as parents, we're also experiencing our own emotions around transition.
Yeah. My baby.
That's
it.
And our own expectations about how that transition should go.
Yeah.
So it kind of could create a bit of a divide. So I would urge any parents to reach out as soon as possible around that. In terms of kind of those anxieties that continue on longer than a few weeks. So now we're talking about children that go to school, but they're quite quiet. They're coming home. I'm finding it tricky. I think after a period of a few weeks, then we'd be saying, right, let's identify a trusted adult in school. We need someone within school who you can go to, and they will support you to manage those anxieties around school. So again, it could be that for a child that it's a new school environment, and I'm really worried about being lost. Actually, it's been 2 weeks, which is normally the kind of time frame secondaries give you.
Your geography, don't you?
And I'm still struggling with the idea of that, and that's causing me some kind of anxieties, or I'm not feeling great about that. That's at the point that we would say, well, we need to communicate this to school, because they can then support you with that. So whether that's putting some strategies in place or taking the time to understand what is it we need to do to help you, and also just give them extra time to adjust. Not every child is going to pick it up that quickly.
Do you find some kids don't want to be picked out for help? I've got, like for example, I've got friends who had a son, and he could have got extra help with dyslexia and stuff like that, with exams, and he was desperate. desperate not to be the kid that's getting the extra help, the kid that's getting the extra attention, the kid, so
it makes you different, doesn't it?
Yeah,
so it stands out.
So do you find that you sometimes get kids that go, I don't want to tell it, and then that's another anxiety on top of the anxiety? They're not, is that a trickier one to manage?
And that does happen, and it is tricky to manage, but it's not impossible. Okay. And I think it's about respecting children for their individual choices and affording them the dignity to make that choice.
Yep.
And then we look at how we can support them, but from afar.
Yep.
So again, quite often it's around a trusted adult, and even if it's just a check-in between lessons, everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. Just a nod, thumbs up, we're good. Nice. And that's the way it's kind of managed. Sometimes, let's say toilet passes, that's a big one. Everyone worries when they're at secondary school, how am I going to use the toilet? At primary school, I'm skipping out, and, I'm using the toilet when I want. And at secondary school, there are rules here.
There are.
That's it. And I think, again, it's that communication between home and school, and I think one of my biggest messages will always be just have open communication with school. Do not feel like the change as well for parents, recognizing there is that change. At primary, you're used to going and picking them up. You're seeing the teacher every day. You're seeing your child come out their classroom door. At secondary, that doesn't happen. So parents suddenly feel like they're quite distanced from school, and that's not the case. It's just perception. So I think sometimes it's communicate. Don't let it get to the point where you're actually feeling stressed as well. You can see your child is struggling, that's causing you to feel stressed, and then you just kind of explode at the school because they won't know. They haven't had that kind of build up that you've got, because they won't yet know your child. When we get to year 8, year 9, they will be able to spot and go, okay. But at that point, they won't know who your child is or what they're about. It takes time. As
so often, it's communication. We hear this all the time with so many of our guests. We've spoken about that. Well, we're going to come back for part number 3 in just a few minutes of the Down But Not Out podcast here on MKFM. Welcome back to part number 3 of the Down But Not Out podcast here on MKFM with the Arthur Ellis Mental Health Foundation and our fabulous guest talking about transitioning between schools, Vic. So we're on to the final section. This is all about solutions. I know John's got loads more questions to pepper you with over the next 10 minutes. So pepper away.
I don't want to pepper you, don't worry. But,
don't want you to feel anxious because
we spoke about anxiety a bunch, and anxiety is the worry or concern about uncertain future events. So given that all of our future is uncertain, it's a bit of a raw deal. But there is a big distinction between anxiety being useful for us, where we're probing for those answers and we're looking for certainty in the uncertain, through to not leaving the house again. So we, in our one-to-one service, we would go through a variety of different techniques with people, strategies, things like that. So it'd be really good to hear from the school's perspective, or a school's perspective, what can be supported there. But do you guys go through like grounding techniques and different methods of changing the way that you think? Like, if you've got a really anxious kid, what's the approach? So as talked about, primaries, typically you'll see like zones of regulation in use. Secondary, we don't tend to see that as much, but what we'll do is there'll be a pastoral team within school who will support young people who are presenting with any kind of anxieties or just any kind of concern, really. So as we said, sometimes anxiety is quite useful, and staff will talk to the young person about how they're feeling. So I've got a test, I'm feeling worried. Okay, that's perfectly normal, and actually let's take some time to use some breathing techniques. So they'll sit and kind of encourage pupils to utilise safe spaces in school. So they might take them to the library if that's where the pupil kind of identifies as an area that they feel calm within school, and they'll ask them to kind of do their 5 things you can see, kind of go through those strategies with pupils. And actually it's around teaching our young people and our children how to support themselves in those moments, and how to take the time to reflect on how they're feeling and consider, is this something that is a perceived threat, or is this something that actually is just a passing thought that I can say, oh, okay, I've acknowledged it and I'm going to kind of move it on. So there are lots of techniques that are used in schools, but
we kind of differentiate. So you do have in some schools you have like school counsellors where pupils will access, but the pastoral team tend to be the team that kind of pick up children who maybe just need a minute, need a little bit of extra support. There might be some kind of nurture-based provision in school, so they can utilise those kind of areas. But it tends to be really the emphasis is on encouraging young people to use the kind of tools at their disposal. So really encouraging them to think about what it is that's worrying them and acknowledge it, and then try and process whether this is, as I say, a perceived threat. Is this a real threat? Or is this just kind of a thought?
Just a question. Why don't they teach this stuff because obviously we're talking about kids that have gone, I feel anxious, I feel this, but just surely as a regular part of almost the curriculum, a life skill, to actually have that as part of, would that not be, has that ever been considered? I'm not trying to change the educational system, but I'm just saying, it's like so many things. That sounds like a fabulous thing to learn at a young age, because there are adults that suffer from anxiety that have never been told to breathe. I don't even know about the 5 things that you just said. You both nodded. I was like, I don't know what the 5 things are. Well, you identified.
Oh, okay, yeah, we can talk through that.
But I don't know any of that. But, taking them at a young age and allowing them to self-regulate, showing them how to, that's what a fabulous lesson. But why is that not, more readily available? Anyway, that was another thing. Sorry, that's a tangent. I'll just draw that back.
The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that you mentioned is a grounding technique. So it's basically for anyone who's in that state of 100 miles an hour thoughts or overwhelmed, shallow breathing, that sort of thing. Maybe even like a poorly tummy. I used to be sick before I went to school when I was younger because I got bullied a lot. So like when I was younger, it came out in that way.
Right.
So at the time, what would have been really helpful is a few grounding techniques. So that's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is one of them, which is 5 things you can see. There's different variations of it.
Okay.
But 5 things you can see, and you basically look around yourself and list 5 things in your head.
Yeah.
Then there's 4 things that you can hear, so you've got to be quiet and listen.
Oh.
Then there's 3 things that you can touch.
Touch, yeah.
Right.
2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste, usually.
If you're in the library, books.
Yeah, exactly,
lovely.
Yeah. The smell of books is all right.
No, but the taste of them sucks.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, okay.
So the idea really for a grounding technique, and you can do breathing techniques. There's one called 5-2-7, which is in for 5, hold for 2, out for 7.
Yes.
Replenishes your oxygen.
Wow.
So mindfulness isn't actually recommended for anyone who's going through a difficult time with anxiety. It's kind of
the opposite.
The last thing you want to be is in your mind when it's going at 100 miles an hour. So grounding techniques are designed to distract or take you away from your mind. So like you said, Vic, the cloud almost clears and you can tackle what you've got to tackle a bit more rationally.
Is this the type of thing that if you recognise it in a child and the pastoral care is there and they're doing these sort of techniques, is there a communication to the parents to go, look, we tried this, it helped, this is something you could try? Do parents know this, or is it just like, no, we've calmed him down, off you go? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they are. The teams will communicate with the parents, and I think this, you're absolutely right. It needs to come at an earlier stage, actually, because I remember with my own children, talking to them and teaching them breathing techniques. So because all children go through a range of emotions, and it's really helpful for a majority of those kind of emotions.
Yeah.
But actually, again, for parents, recognising with your own child what works and what doesn't work. Some children actually just need to be outside. They need to be outside for a period of time just to kind of, again, process and just feel the feeling. And that takes a little bit of time. So it might be, some children will have movement breaks. And it will be that they kind of, are allowed to leave class and just move. Just need to move through it, and then they'll get themselves to a place where actually, I feel like I can access the classroom again now.
Yeah.
But it is exactly that. There's a real distinction between you can't well-being yourself out of a mental health issue or crisis. I think that's really important for people to understand as well. As parents, we always say walk it off. You've got a broken leg, walk it off. Anything, walk it off.
God, I love it. 80s parent in there, walk it off, you'll be right.
But you can't. You can't, and I think what you can do is recognise where we're, as we said, kind of normal kind of anxieties, and the start of that is absolutely, we recognise it, we talk about it, we communicate, and we start to do those strategies.
Okay.
Where we're talking about where we're hitting a crisis,
Yeah.
you absolutely need external support with
Right.
that. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really clear distinction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the way that we kind of define it, because I've got my banana and donuts top on.
It looks lovely.
Thank you. So we have bananas, which are all of your healthy behaviours and the different things that you can engage in to make yourself feel better. But that's very much a preventative thing.
Mhm.
Donuts are the indulgent behaviours that we can switch to. So if I was planning on going for a walk for myself this evening, and then work goes on and it's late and it's been a horrible commute home, then I'm probably going to do a donut instead. I'm not going to go for that walk. I'm going to have a takeaway and maybe doom scroll for ages. But then what the distinction that we make is if you can't access those healthy behaviours for whatever reason,
Yeah.
you can't get out of bed to go for a walk, or your enjoyment's gone, and
Yeah.
all of those things, that's when you need to start reaching out for some extra help. Would you say that's the same for young people,
yeah,
parents?
absolutely. Yeah, so hygiene is a big one,
Massive,
and young people struggling to sleep, access,
God, yeah.
healthier foods, socialise. So when you start to see some of these behaviours, it's really, really important that you're acknowledging them, but also that you're seeking external support.
Right.
So and I think that's, again, as we're saying, if your young person's kind of still able to do some of the things like choose to go on a walk and socialise and do all of those bits, then okay, we can access some support. But actually there is a cohort of young people where they end up, through no fault of their own, in a situation where they can't access the things.
Right.
It's not choice based.
No.
It's gone too far, and is that a point that's that the schools would recognise, or is that a point that you hope that the parents would recognise and talk to the schools about it? I mean, how does
Sometimes it
case by case, maybe, I suppose?
Case by case, you'd hope that both will have recognised equally, and I think sometimes the onus is put on the young person too much to recognise themselves.
Okay, yeah.
And actually, when you're in a space where you are overwhelmed, where you're depressed, where you're anxious, it's very, very difficult to identify that. It's very difficult to regulate yourself to a place where you can say, I need help. So the young people that are coming forward and saying, do you know, I'm not in a great place here, absolutely we need to pick them up and support, because that's a really big step to self-recognise that you aren't right, you're not okay at this moment in time, and actually you aren't feeling yourself, because what every young person does is different to them. Some young people like to game all day. That is not indicative of like somebody with a mental health issue.
No.
But for another young person that's used to being outside all the day, if suddenly they're in their room and they're not leaving and they're struggling to communicate with their peers, that would be an indicator that something's not right.
Those changes in characteristics.
That's absolutely right. So it needs to be a combination of all, because it's very seldom that you have a young person who, and they might be quiet in school. They might be someone that doesn't really access much support in school, but who is really struggling at home and then just presenting at school as, everything's fine. Typically, you'll see some withdrawn behaviour. So it's important that it comes from both sides.
It's a proper game face situation, and it's interesting you say about like a young person recognising that. As adults don't, so how are we, expectant of young people to, with slightly less life experience? But
you're going to want to round up.
I know.
I've got one more question.
Oh, go on, you go for it. No, because it's intriguing. Sorry, sorry.
Vic, what's your stance on exposure? So, like with anxiety, sometimes voluntary exposure can be really useful. So, doing trips to the school before they start, and what do you think about that? Is that something that can help?
Absolutely. So I think, as I said before, it's a huge change for our young people. So things like walk the route to school.
Yeah.
Okay. So take away that stress of, do I know where I'm going? Walk together a few times, and then let your young person walk themselves. So you at a distance, take away the kind of unknown. Otherwise it's quite ambiguous if you're kind of, I'm off I go. Recognise that the people that may be taking that route and then arrive at the school together so you can see it. Here we are, here's school, this is where you're going to be going in. Reach out to the school, see if someone's available over summer that can just give you a little bit of a quiet tour if that's what you feel your child needs. Set out your uniform, practice putting it on. Do not wait until day one to teach your child how to do a tie. Doesn't work.
No.
So that, look at your timetable, start thinking about those really practical steps of how am I going to attempt to alleviate some of these worries and practice some of these really useful life techniques before I have to do that, on the first day of school on my own. So absolutely, I think exposing your child to some of the new routines is going to be really useful.
Well, I think if anxiety is the worry or concern about unknown future, then the less you can make unknown, the better you're going to feel about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes logical sense. It genuinely does. Vic, thank you so much for taking the time. Honestly, some of this stuff, it blows my I say every time, blows my mind, some of this stuff. But actually, those practical tips, brilliant for parents whose kids are off to big school. Big school. Yeah. Even the word big school still scares me. That was the Arthur Ellis Down But Not Out podcast here on MKFM.